On the day they brought industrial-grade cable cutters to sever my $9 $412 backup generator, they believed the authority of the HOA board was supreme and unshakable. They smugly marched into my backyard while I was away, used cold steel blades to cut through every single copper transmission wire, severed both the low-voltage control lines and the system's automatic start signal wires, and then taped a red stamp fine notice to my front door stating the equipment violated general aesthetic and landscape standards. The woman presiding over that board even called me directly, using a patronizing, mocking tone, to declare that if I did not pay the accumulated fines and personally dismantle the entire engine block, they would foreclose on my property and auction off my log cabin. She believed that a quiet widower, living silently at the edge of the valley, would quickly surrender and drop to his knees begging for mercy, just as many other residents had done before to buy their peace. But there was one thing she and that arrogant board completely failed to anticipate. I had spent nearly 30 years of my life working in federal financial auditing and military geodetic surveying. I understood the inner workings of the law, the sacred value of original deeds, and most importantly, I was someone who preserved records with an almost obsessive level of meticulousness. I had quietly recorded every single trace, every email, and every absurd fine receipt over the past 2 years, preparing for a total legal counteroffensive. 3 weeks later, when a historic blizzard with roaring winds swept through the Colorado mountains, plunging their luxury residential community into freezing darkness and complete isolation, the arrogant kingdom of that woman officially collapsed. And the most delicious irony of this poetic justice was that it began with a very unpermitted, unlicensed generator installed in her own backyard. To understand why things unfolded this way, we have to turn back the clock 12 years when I decided to leave behind the noise and suffocating pressure of Wall Street to seek a peaceful retirement in the residential community of Pine Ridge Estates, nestled right at the foot of the majestic Rocky Mountains in Colorado. Back then, this place was still an untouched wilderness, with towering ponderosa pines whispering in the mountain breeze, and the air always carrying the fresh scent of pine resin. I purchased a stretch of land spanning over 20 acres, adjacent to the boundary of the National Forest, and personally renovated my family's old log cabin, and lived a simple life with my beloved wife, Diane. Diane was a gentle woman who loved nature and wildflowers. She had spent the final years of her life caring for a small garden behind our house, where she planted lavender wild daisies and other Colorado native species. But 3 years ago, after a long and exhausting battle with a terminal illness, Diane passed away, leaving me alone in that spacious log cabin filled with memories. In the deep void of my grief, I found a strange, quiet comfort in my daily predictable routines. Waking up at 5 in the morning, brewing a cup of strong black coffee, walking along the barbed wire property line to inspect the boundary markers, and spending the afternoon tending to the wildflower garden Diane had loved so much. To the newer residents who had moved in from big cities, I was just a shabby, eccentric old man in a faded canvas jacket stained with grease driving a rusty Ford F-150 covered in mud. They had no idea that this quiet, reserved man had once been the terror of major financial corporations, someone who could dissect a complex 1,000-page financial report and expose the most sophisticated fraud schemes in a matter of hours. I kept a low profile not out of secrecy, but because grief had taught me that some of the most important things in life are better carried quietly and with reverence. Winters at the foot of the Rockies are a brutal test of human endurance and technical infrastructure. The main power grid in this area, built decades ago, frequently failed whenever a blizzard rolled in. After a massive storm left the entire region without power for 61 consecutive hours in minus 20-degree temperatures, I realized I could not leave the safety of my home and the cabin filled with memories to the whims of the weather. I decided to spend $9,412 to install a high-end automatic backup generator powered by natural gas connected directly to my main electrical panel through an intelligent automatic transfer switch. As a man who always respected the law and technical procedures before beginning construction, I filed a complete permit application with the county, hired an independent licensed electrical engineer to design the wiring schematics, and submitted the entire package to the HOA board of that era for approval. The original approval document bearing the signature of the former president and the official seal of the association was carefully laminated and stored inside my double-walled fireproof steel safe, which was bolted securely to the concrete foundation beneath my study floor. The generator was installed flawlessly, operating quietly behind a thick grove of pine trees, completely hidden from view and causing no aesthetic disruption to the surroundings. However, the peace of my life in the entire Pinner Ridge Estates community began to deteriorate when Vanessa Holloway stepped into the role of HOA board president. Vanessa was a woman in her early 50s, a former commercial real estate broker who carried herself with the sharp, arrogant demeanor of someone accustomed to commanding and controlling everything around her. She ran the HOA like a queen ruling over her own small kingdom, imposing a rulebook of nearly 100 pages on every home in the neighborhood. Vanessa believed that by enforcing an iron discipline without exception, she was protecting property values for everyone. In reality, she was simply feeding her own thirst for personal power by thuggishly interfering with the freedom of the residents. She launched a general landscape compliance audit, sending out red-stamped letters fining residents for the most ridiculous things: a mailbox painted a shade slightly off from the approved color palette, grass growing past 3 inches, or leaving trash cans on the curb for more than 15 minutes after the garbage truck passed. Most residents here were busy professionals or elderly retirees who feared legal conflict. They chose to pay the couple $100 fines just to buy their peace. And that submissive compliance only fed Vanessa's arrogance, inflating it to extreme heights. To Vanessa, my rustic log cabin, with its natural wildflower meadow and the industrial generator tucked behind the pines, was an unsightly scar that ruined the synchronized aesthetic she so desperately craved. She decided she would force me to dismantle my equipment or pack up and leave to make room for her planned community landscape expansion projects. The first fine notice arrived at my house on a freezing afternoon in November. In the letter, Vanessa declared that my backup generator was an unauthorized structure incompatible with the community's new aesthetic standards, and demanded that I completely remove it within 30 days, accompanied by an initial fine of $500. I read the letter, calmly walked into my study to open the safe, retrieve copies of the county building permits and the original HOA approval bearing the former board's signatures, and sent them back to the HOA office via certified mail with a very polite response. I believed that with such undeniable legal documents, anyone with a basic understanding of the law would recognize their mistake and back down. But I underestimated Vanessa's arrogance. Instead of responding professionally, she sent a second letter coldly declaring, "All approvals from the previous board are null and void under the new aesthetic guidelines passed earlier this year. Mr. Carroll has 10 days to voluntarily comply before enforcement measures are executed." When I cross-referenced the violation clauses Vanessa cited in her letter with the official original HOA bylaws in my possession, I discovered a shocking truth: the clauses she used to fine me did not exist in the official bylaws registered with the county. Vanessa had fabricated these phantom clauses in her notices to intimidate and extort residents under the guise of community standards. As a former financial auditor, I immediately smelled systemic fraud. I chose to stay quiet, not arguing or speaking out during community meetings to avoid tipping off my opponent. I wanted to see exactly how far this woman was willing to go in her arrogance. And indeed, that arrogance pushed her to direct property damage on a freezing morning in December. That morning, I had to drive into the city early to purchase some agricultural supplies for my apple orchard. As I drove my truck past the boundary of my property, I noticed a white van with no logos quietly parking near my fence line. In my rearview mirror, I saw 2 men wearing HOA maintenance jackets step out carrying large tool bags. I knew exactly what they were planning to do, but I did not turn my truck around. I kept driving, leaving the 4K security cameras hidden along the pine trees to automatically record every second of the event. The maintenance crew, under Vanessa's direct instructions over the phone, brazenly cut the chain lock on my back gate, walked to the generator, and used heavy cable cutters to sever the lines. They cut the main power feed, the low-voltage control wires, and even the automatic startup signal wires, reducing my $9,000 system to a useless piece of metal in under 15 minutes. Before leaving, they taped a red enforcement notice to my door, declaring that the unsightly aesthetic violation had been removed by management to protect the integrity of the neighborhood. When I returned home that afternoon, a cold mountain fog had begun to roll over the valley. I walked to the backyard and stood looking at the silent generator, its severed copper cables dusted with a thin layer of snow. A deep, cold anger settled into my chest. This destruction was not just property damage. It was a thuggish violation of my home and the memory of Diane, the woman who had built this place with me, the woman for whom this generator had once powered the life support equipment that kept her breathing in her final days. I did not rage shout or run to Vanessa's house to argue. Hot anger only blinds a man. Cold patience is a surveyor's sharpest tool. I pulled out my phone, photographed every cut from multiple angles, collected the severed cable pieces in sealed plastic bags, and carefully peeled the notice off my door to place it in my manila folder. I called Marcus Reed, the electrician who had originally installed the system. Marcus arrived within an hour, knelt in the snow to inspect the damage, and looked up at me with absolute fury. "Ethan, these cuts are precise and deliberate. This wasn't a maintenance crew clearing a line. They knew exactly which wires to cut to disable the automatic starter. It will cost at least $1,000 to $1,200 to repair and recertify this system." "Marcus," I said quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder, "start the repairs immediately. I want this system fully operational before next week. Itemize every single expense on a detailed invoice. We will need it very soon." Next, I contacted Rebecca Lawson, a sharp, experienced property rights attorney in Cascade County, who specialized in taking down abusive HOA boards. Rebecca welcomed me into her office, and as I laid out the manila folder containing the 4K surveillance footage showing the faces of the vandals, the original HOA approvals, Vanessa's fabricated citation letters, and Marcus's repair invoices, she leaned back in her chair, her eyes flashing with professional excitement. "Ethan," she said, "this is no longer a simple civil dispute. Their unauthorized entry and destruction of your permitted backup generator is a serious criminal act of property damage. Furthermore, their use of fabricated clauses to levy fines under the guise of official authority constitutes fraud and extortion under state law. I can file for an emergency temporary restraining order from the county court tomorrow to keep them off your land." "I want more than that, Rebecca," I replied, my voice quiet but steely. "I want to completely strip the mask of authority off this woman in front of the entire community. I want everyone to see her for the fraud she is." Rebecca smiled a seasoned lawyer's grin. "Then we will use the strategy of delayed gratification. Let them continue to fine you. Let them send more threatening letters. The more confident they are, the more written evidence they will leave on official paper. And in the meantime, I will launch an independent investigation into their own operations." Over the next 2 weeks, the valley remained in a state of tense silence. Vanessa sent 3 more retroactive fine notices, raising the total penalty to $3,200, accompanied by a formal threat to foreclose on my log cabin by the end of the month. I did not respond to a single letter, which only made Vanessa more confident that I was terrified and had accepted my fate. She even bragged to other board members during a closed meeting that the stubborn old man at the edge of the valley is about to pack up because he can't handle the heat. But while Vanessa was basking in her illusion of victory, Marcus and I quietly completed the repairs on my generator, installed reinforced security cages around the unit, and buried the transmission cables in heavy-duty conduit according to the highest safety codes. At the same time, through quiet conversations with Mrs. Patricia, an elderly resident living 2 streets down, I discovered a highly satisfying irony. Vanessa had also installed a backup generator at her own luxury villa during the previous spring. Drawing on my auditing background, I accessed the Cascade County online permit database and searched her address there. Was absolutely no permit, no electrical inspection record, and no environmental approval on file for her generator. The woman who used fabricated clauses to destroy my permitted equipment was running an illegal, unpermitted generator that had never passed a safety or fire code inspection. I knew then that the trap was fully set. We only had to wait for nature to spring it. The trigger arrived in mid-December. The National Weather Service began broadcasting urgent alerts about a historic blizzard dubbed the Storm of the Century moving rapidly toward Colorado. Forecasters predicted 2 to 3 feet of snow, accompanied by howling mountain winds that would drop temperatures to minus 30 degrees, warning of a potential grid failure across the entire county. As residents rushed to hoard food and firewood, I stood on my porch watching the luxury SUVs hurry down the snow-covered roads. I checked my heater, ensured my natural gas lines were clear, and verified that my generator was ready. My home was prepared. On Thursday night, the storm hit with full force. The snow fell in blinding sheets and the wind howled as it slammed against the double-pane glass windows of my cabin. At exactly 3:47 a.m. on Friday, a massive explosion rocked the regional substation and the entire main grid collapsed. Pine Ridge Estates was instantly plunged into freezing darkness. In my cabin, exactly 5 seconds after the grid failed, a low, powerful hum vibrated through the floorboards as a generator kicked in. The lights flickered and then blazed. The heating system purred, filling the rooms with warmth and keeping the freezing storm at bay. I sat in my warm kitchen, took a sip of hot coffee, and watched the snow swirl outside, feeling a deep, profound peace. Across the property line, however, Vanessa's kingdom was entering a nightmare. Without power, the heating systems in the luxury mansions failed, and temperatures inside began to drop toward freezing. Vanessa's unpermitted generator had started up, but because it had been wired illegally without proper safety inspections, the sudden load imbalance caused the voltage regulator to overload, frying the control board and leaving her mansion completely dark and freezing. By Saturday morning, the storm had cleared, but the cold remained intense. Desperate for warmth and a place to charge their phones, several residents, including Angela Ruiz, a young nurse, and Ruth Hensley, an elderly widow caring for her sick mother who relied on an oxygen concentrator, went to Vanessa's mansion to ask if they could share her backup power. Vanessa opened her door only a crack and coldly turned them away. "This is a private system not designed to support the community. You will have to find your own solutions." Her selfishness in the face of a crisis spread like wildfire through the community's group chats. The residents realized that the woman who had spent years harassing them under the banner of community standards was a hypocrite who would leave them to freeze while she sat in her own home. On Monday, as soon as the roads were cleared of snow, the emergency arbitration hearing between myself and Pine Ridge Estates was held at the County Community Center. Harlan Briggs, a retired civil court judge known for his strict adherence to the letter of the law, presided over the meeting. The room was packed with over 150 angry residents. They had not come to watch a routine dispute. They had come to see Vanessa Holloway answer for what she had done. Vanessa arrived with her expensive legal team dressed sharply but looking visibly exhausted and pale after days of freezing in her dark mansion. She still tried to carry her usual haughty demeanor, clutching her file of violation notices, confident that her position as HOA president would shield her from any real consequences. The hearing began. The HOA's attorney stood up, launched into a long, aggressive speech, accusing me of being a non-compliant resident who operated an unauthorized generator, violated aesthetic standards, and ignored repeated official fines. When they finished, Rebecca Lawson stood up. She did not rush. She opened her folder and projected our evidence onto the large screen at the front of the room. "Mr. Arbitrator, residents of Pine Ridge," Rebecca's voice rang out clear and steely, commanding the room's attention. "We are not here to debate opinions or aesthetics. We are here to look at the paperwork, the only thing that carries weight under the law." She first projected the original HOA approval document signed 8 years prior, along with the county building permits and Marcus Reed's signed electrical safety certifications. Every document was flawless, fully permitted, and completely legal. Next, Rebecca projected a side-by-side comparison on the screen. On the left were the violation notices Vanessa had sent me. On the right were the official HOA bylaws registered with Cascade County. "As you can see," Rebecca said, pointing to the highlighted sections, "the clauses cited by Mrs. Holloway to levy these fines do not exist in the official bylaws. Mrs. Holloway fabricated these phantom clauses to extort money from residents under the guise of official authority." An angry uproar swept through the room. Residents began pulling out their own fine notices to compare them on the spot. Harlan Briggs had to hammer his gavel 3 times to restore order. But Rebecca was not finished. She projected the high-definition security footage of the morning of the sabotage. The room watched in stunned silence as the two maintenance workers cut through my generator's cables while Vanessa directed them over her phone. This was not an aesthetic enforcement, Rebecca said, slamming her hand on the table. This was criminal trespassing and intentional destruction of private property. They disabled a legally permitted emergency system right before a historic blizzard, endangering the life of a resident. And this act was directed by the very woman sitting at the defense table. Vanessa sat frozen sweat breaking out on her forehead. Her attorney tried to call for a recess to settle, but Judge Briggs denied the request, ordering Rebecca to continue. And finally, Rebecca said, projecting the county permit records for Vanessa's address. While Mrs. Holloway was destroying Mr. Carroll's permitted generator, she was operating an unpermitted, unlicensed generator in her own backyard, an illegal installation that has never passed a county safety or fire inspection. The room erupted. Shouts of anger and disgust were directed at Vanessa from every corner. The residents she had bullied and left to freeze stood up demanding her immediate resignation and prosecution. Judge Briggs hammered his gavel and delivered his ruling, his voice carrying the finality of an absolute verdict. This court declares all fines levied against Mr. Ethan Carroll null and void. The association is ordered to reimburse Mr. Carroll $1,040 for the repair of his equipment, cover all of his legal fees, and pay punitive damages for the intentional destruction of property. Furthermore, this court is forwarding the evidence of fraud, trespassing, and property destruction committed by Vanessa Holloway to the Cascade County District Attorney for immediate criminal prosecution. Vanessa sat motionless, her face completely drained of color. Her empire of fear, built over 6 years of bullying, had collapsed in a single hour, under the weight of precise, documented truth. Within 72 hours of the hearing, under pressure from both the residents and the pending criminal investigation, Vanessa Holloway resigned from the board and hastily listed her mansion for sale, fleeing the valley in shame. The old board was completely dissolved. The residents elected David Farrow, an honest, practical, mechanical engineer, as the new HOA president. Under his leadership, the 100-page rulebook was thrown out, replaced by a simple 5-page document focused on shared maintenance and mutual respect, drafted with input from myself and Rebecca Lawson. The new rules ensured that no resident could be fined without a 30-day written notice, specifying the exact registered bylaw violated, and guaranteed every resident the right to a fair hearing. By spring, the snow had melted, and the valley returned to life. Diane's wildflower garden bloomed again, filling the backyard with the sweet scent of lavender and daisies. I sat on my porch, took a sip of hot coffee, and looked at the generator behind the pines, now protected by a neat wooden fence built to the highest safety codes. I walked into my study, placed the court's final ruling and the association's official apology letter in my filing cabinet next to Diane's old photographs, and closed the drawer. Arrogance and fabricated rules will always crumble when they run into a quiet, meticulous record kept by someone with the patience to wait for the truth to speak. Real power is not a title, a clipboard, or a luxury car. It is the quiet, documented facts sitting in a safe waiting for the right moment. The valley had returned to its natural peace quiet, and deep reflecting the majestic peaks of the Rockies, carrying the story of a man who held the line of truth to the next seasons of life.